Yes, I'm live.
Yep.
My audio's on. All right. What's up, people? Welcome to Other Life, my weird live stream slash podcast slash blogging, book writing adventure that I'm on. Thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out. I'm always glad and vaguely surprised that people continue to check into these shows. If you're here for the first time, perhaps just because you're interested in Angela Nagle and you could care less about me, that's totally cool. But I have to tell you that this is also a podcast. So if you want to listen to this later, like if you're not able to hear all of this on YouTube, because it's kind of hard to listen to things on YouTube, you should subscribe to the podcast. It's called Other Life. Just do a search for it wherever you get your podcasts. And what else? Angela's going to be with us in just a few minutes, like literally, I think about 3 minutes, somewhere between like 3 and 10 minutes, depending on how quickly she's able to figure out the technology on her end. So in the meantime, I'm just going to kind of welcome you all and warm things up a little bit. So yeah, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to. If you don't, I really don't care. No pressure. And yeah, that's about it. Oh, and huge thanks to my patrons. I try to always give a shout out to my patrons. I'm very grateful to have them. It's okay. We got some feedback. Just there we go. Cool. And yeah, try to always say thanks. Much gratitude to those of you out there who support what I'm doing. I mean, much gratitude to those of you out there who even understand what I'm doing. So it means a lot. All right. I'm really looking forward to talking to Angela. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. We got Ben over here monitoring everything, my assistant slash friend slash intern, whatever. What do you like to be called?
All that.
All that? Okay, cool. Cool. You're going to be monitoring the chat, right?
And it looks like there's a little pickup here. It looks like that I won't be able to do anything from StreamYard, so I'll have to do the comments from the YouTube studio. So I don't think we'll have the capability to superimpose comments.
Oh, bummer. Yeah. Okay, that's all right. We'll figure it out as we go. That's all right. So yeah, but we'll be monitoring the chat. If you have any good questions or comments, Ben will communicate them to me. So yeah, most of you are probably know about Angela Nagle. While we're waiting for her to arrive, I'll give you a very brief introduction. I think she kind of became quite well known with her book called Kill All Normies, which came out just a few years ago. I think it was a 2017 book. It kind of came out right around the time of Trump's election. And yeah, it's interesting because it's a short book. You know, it's not this. I mean, if you read it, I think any reasonable person who reads it, it's hard to find any kind of particularly scandalous claims in it, but it made quite a stir. And I think just because of the time that it came out was a very sensitive time. And what's interesting is that things have changed a lot. Well, depending on how you look at it, things have either not really changed or changed a lot. But in my view, the phenomena she describes in that book have really kind of accelerated to a degree that I think does represent a kind of qualitative change to some degree. So I'm very curious to hear if she thinks, you know, just how she sees things since writing that book, like if she's changed her mind about anything, or if the lay of the land now looks different to her. The book is, of course, for those of you who don't know about it, just basically about, I think the subtitle is something in the subtitle is about the online culture wars. And it deals a little bit with kind of the online alt-left, if you will, and the online alt-right and all of that. And yeah, it's a relatively short and accessible, kind of punchy survey of kind of the online political ideological fragmentation that I also have been writing quite a lot about over the past few years. So yeah, I think we'll have more than enough to talk about. I'm very curious to kind of pick her brain and understand better how she sees things. And when she arrives, Ben, you're gonna give me a shout, and then you're just gonna bring her in, right? And just make sure I know when you bring her in, so I can like welcome her, and she's not gonna be sitting there confused for a long period of time. You got this. Folks, we're using this new system called StreamYard, and we think we pretty much have it under control. We did a test run of it yesterday to get the kinks out. So I think everything is fine, but we have like a new computer and we have new stuff. So yeah, if there are any issues that we're unaware of, definitely just tell us in the chat. We'll get them sorted. But I think everything's good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there something?
Yeah, I mean, just the comment thing, it says when streaming to a custom destination. I think that's why
right.
You can't use it, but yeah.
No, that's fine. In the future, we'll just know to do that. No big deal. Yeah. So, oh yeah. So what I was going to say is if you want to pull something up, you could, I tweeted something a few days ago that is, I don't even know where it came from. But someone made this GIF. It's like a table that I don't know how to summarize it. I tweeted it or retweeted it.
So it's on your
yeah, it basically breaks up kind of anti-woke leftists into ethnic categories.
Oh, yeah, no,
Did you see that? Yeah. You don't have to bring it up into the stream right now, but you should bring it up in a tab because it's kind of funny because Angela Nagle and I are put in the same category because we're both Irish. Yeah, varying degrees of Irish. I think she's more Irish than I am, but yeah, it was kind of funny. Yeah, and then I saw on Twitter that Anna Kachian, if that's how you pronounce it, I'm not even sure. She said something. She made an interesting tweet that I thought was a interesting point. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's a provocative hypothesis that what she said was, if kind of mainstream idpol or identity politics, the whole kind of social justice warrior tendency, if that isn't in some weird kind of way a kind of waspy way of attacking like non-WASP white people, like what she calls off-white people. And I thought that was kind of interesting because that's kind of what that GIF seems to suggest, that a lot of the anti-woke left people are basically non-WASPy people. They're off-white, as she says. And I do wonder if there's something to that. I haven't really thought about that before, but it stands to reason. We got any interesting comments or questions in the chat yet?
We have going into a little side discussion about genuine socialists. There are no socialists anymore, just like there are no Nazis. Everyone is just LARPing.
Yeah, in the future with this StreamYard platform that we're using now, what they do is they let you show comments in the chat in the live stream itself, but we set it up differently today. There are like different ways you can set it up, so we're not able to do that today. But yeah, it's got some cool bells and whistles, so the live stream from now on should get a little bit more kind of interesting and interactive. So yeah, we're working on that.
She is in the building.
All right, we have Angela Nagle in the building. I don't know if she can even hear this right now, but we're going to bring her in, and then Ben, you'll tell me when she's in the live stream.
I can do that now.
All right.
You were both live.
All right, Angela, can you see me and hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Do I sound okay?
Okay.
That's okay. We'll sort it. We're not hearing you.
Okay.
Check that your mic is right, Angela. It probably is. We might have an issue on our end. Is the computer audio on?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. Angela, can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you and see you, yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Sorry, we're just getting our technological issues sorted. We're not like the the Saint the Joe Rogan experience. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on to hang out with me for a little bit.
Oh, thanks.
Could you tell us where roughly, to whatever degree of precision you're comfortable with, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And do you live there now, like full time, or?
Yeah.
Have you lived there for a long time?
No, I escaped New York pretty recently. I escaped Brooklyn.
Pittsburgh is pretty cool. I've been there. It's like super hilly, right? And they have that cool gondola.
Yeah, well, the really cool thing about Pittsburgh is that, I guess it's a kind of a mixed bag where you have in the center, there's everything is basically called Carnegie or Frick.
Right.
And so there's all these amazing parks and libraries and a big university. There's this place called the Cathedral of Learning, which is this very beautiful building. You can just go in there. Anyone can just walk in and sit in this amazing setting and just like read a book or something. It's really beautiful. But of course, all this beautiful stuff was created by like some of the most violent union busters in American history. So
right.
It's a mix. And, I was actually thinking too, I was reading about Carnegie, and in this piece I was reading about him, the historian was saying that, you know, he basically made most of his fortune. His career as a capitalist was basically complete by, you know, around age 30 or something like that. He was quite young, and he spent much of the rest of his life, you know, opening libraries and doing all these other things. And he gave all of these speeches in which he was very preoccupied with being seen as a person who was giving back to the world, you know.
Right.
And it kind of reminded me a little bit of the woke capitalism thing of today, you know, where it's sort of like he wouldn't give the workers any more pay, but instead he gave them libraries, you know, because he thought that was a more virtuous way of giving back, because if he just gave them the money into their own pockets, they would spend it on vices and so on.
Right. I read that document. I read the biography that came out about him a few years ago. That was, I think, fairly popular. And he basically invented this model of the kind of philanthropist, right? That you kind of see today in the form of Bill Gates, really aggressive and ambitious philanthropic projects, but that are kind of dubiously consistent with and supportive of their like larger plans for domination.
Yeah, and it's terrible because the things that he left behind are actually great, you know. Like
Right.
I go to that library, you know. I don't boycott it or whatever, you know. And you know, they're very just beautiful pieces of architecture, and you know, they are giving back in a way, right? But it was that idea that, as I said, if he just gave the money to the workers, they would just drink it or gamble it or something like that. Like, you know, whereas in this way, he would give back in a way that he was comfortable with, you know. It's also a little bit like the you know, Christian missionaries who would give charity, but with strings attached. You had to join their sect or change your, you know, moral and sexual behavior or whatever to, you know, so it always had those strings attached. I think they did want to give something back. I mean, there was a charitable impulse there. It wasn't totally cynical. Just like I don't think that the kind of progressive capitalists today are totally cynical. I think they really believe they're improving society.
Right. Now, do you think if they did that on a grand enough scale, that possibly it could be quite good and even good enough? Like, I sometimes do flirt with this idea a little bit, at least in my own mind. Like, if the philanthropy was more ambitious and more generous and with less strings attached, I'm kind of like, that could maybe work, like as a model for kind of socialism, like a noblesse oblige model. I mean, back in the day with like the traditional aristocracy, I mean, it obviously has its problems. It has a lot of problems. But I do sometimes flirt with the idea that if there was a way to force that and to make it more generous and universal and widespread, that could actually work. That could maybe work. But do you ever think about that?
I know what you mean. I think about this every day, actually, because I'm surrounded by it. I was thinking exactly that. But I was thinking what it then depends upon. I mean, if you're not talking about a worker-controlled society, right, and this is, say, an alternative you want to think about, it then relies upon the vision and the moral code or whatever, the value system of the aristocrats or whatever the higher you know, elite category is who make the decision on what is valuable to society. And certainly, you know, libraries are much better than, like, you know, a rainbow colored credit card or something like that. You know, that was actually superior.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. But, you know, I'm sure you know as well as anyone that as soon as you start talking with any amount of sympathy towards this idea, it's kind of like, oh, you scumbag apologist. You're just trying to worship the rich and let them off easy.
Yes, but unfortunately, I mean, I think at this stage we're going to have to just let go of that, let go of even trying to explain yourself, because there's simply no way that you can say anything without it being interpreted in bad faith anyway. And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, sometimes I rarely listen to kind of leftist podcasts now, but occasionally when I do, and there's kind of an okay person on there, they just spend the entire thing saying, and I'm not saying that this is okay. And like by the end of the hour or whatever, they haven't even said anything because they've spent the entire time apologizing. Unfortunately, we are just in a situation where almost everything you say will be interpreted in bad faith by almost everyone who is visible on the internet in any way. So there's no real way around that. You just have to accept it and hope that there's somebody out there who isn't going to interpret it in bad faith.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Like, you have to compulsively just over and over again preface everything you're saying with these kind of like caveats and apologies to make sure that people don't call you a fascist, but then they still call you a fascist anyway. So
Yeah.
the solution, I think, is to just stop doing all those apologies, stop doing all the prefaces, and just kind of bite the bullet, let the people call you fascist.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you have a sense of this, but my sense of things is that whole game is kind of starting to run out of steam. I mean, this is very contentious. Some people think it's only really just beginning and it's going to get much worse before it gets better. But my attitude is typically, it seems like it's becoming increasingly obvious to people that this is a kind of really perverse, rotten game that's kind of increasingly outing itself as stupid and unsustainable. And I don't know, it seems to me like there are more and more interesting, really kind of forthright, somewhat transgressive people on the left who are basically willing to bite that bullet and let people call them fascists in favor of their right to basically just say whatever they want and think whatever they want. And it seems like those people right now are starting to gain cultural capital relative to the woke mobs. Is that how you see it, or do you see it differently?
I have definitely noticed that trend recently, and that is a really good thing. The way that they kept the way that they stopped people doing that. Okay, here's an interesting thing, right? I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here.
Great.
So just in the last couple of weeks, I would say, even people are talking about the anti-woke left. But the thing is, there was an anti-woke left back in 2016. I kind of wrote about it a little bit in the book. But they all got canceled. They all got purged. And I'm not talking about canceled as in someone calls you a fascist and you just keep going. I mean, they were destroyed personally, professionally, utterly destroyed. Like I'm one of the only survivors of it.
I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people like you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just gone. Really good writers. It's very sad, and many of them, many of them just eventually said like, this isn't doing anything. Like I didn't become a writer to just have an endless conversation and an endless nonsensical conversation about something I didn't say. Mm-hmm. And so that whole wave of writers is just totally gone. I mean, one of the only reasons I possibly survived is being female. I couldn't be Me Too'd, or I didn't have, I at least couldn't be accused of something of that nature. But yeah, many people just dropped out of just total exhaustion and being kind of driven crazy by it all and everything. So right. What you're seeing now is kind of that coming back a little bit. And the new group of people that are doing it weren't exhausted by the first wave of it. So they kind of have all this energy and they're happy to just plunge back into it, which I think is great, because now I have some company. Right. So yeah, it's really great to see. I guess because of bad experience, I'm inclined to not be as optimistic as you are, but I hope you're right. I really do.
Well, okay, so let's go into that then. Tell us a little bit more about your experiences. Like, when was the first time that you were kind of significantly canceled in a way that was really striking to you? Was it the Kill All Normies book, or was there stuff before that?
Yeah, there was something before that. I was just thinking about this. It's so long ago, I can't actually remember what sparked it, but there was a thing that happened that ended up being referred to by people on the Irish left as Naglegate. And it involved, I mean, this is so generic now, you wouldn't even like really remark upon it. But at the time, it was the first time I'd really seen it. It was like a kind of Twitter mob within the Irish feminist movement against somebody. I can't even remember if it was a man or a woman. And they were just bullying the person, basically, right? Like totally unreasonable, personal, horrible, the standard stuff that's just everywhere now. But as I say, it was unusual at the time. And I just made a passing comment on Facebook or something like that like, this is bullying. Like, why are they, And they all then came after me, and then everyone piled on, and it was a big, a big war between different factions and all this stupid nonsense. So I think from the beginning, I was kind of, even aside from the political element of it, even when I didn't even like agree with the person who was being attacked or whatever, I was always kind of watching with a sense of horror at like, why is everybody, what is it that exists in society normally that punishes or in some way disincentivizes very kind of sociopathic behavior that's just not there anymore. It's gone. There's no reason not to behave like that. And you know Wesley Yang, that writer Wesley Yang?
No, I don't.
He's very good. He's very good. He kind of writes about identity politics and he's very interesting. But he was saying that when he first started seeing like people doing these very public displays of like incredibly mean like behavior, a pack kind of behavior, that he thought this would be bad for their careers ultimately. Like they might do it and then, you know, they would gain the short-term thing of like, you know, attacking an opponent, but ultimately it would be bad for them, and that proved to be wrong.
Right. Well, so far anyway. So far, I mean,
yeah.
it's an open question, I think, about the future, because I think it's not inconceivable that if the tide is turning and the kind of anti-woke left is becoming more fashionable and attractive to people, you could imagine a future in which all of the most rabid kind of political correctness crusaders in the past, let's say 5 years, actually become, you know, anathema themselves. Right. I mean, it's not inconceivable, because I think a lot of these people, the risk that they're taking, these political correctness crusaders, and there's lots of people who have essentially built their own career on a kind of nasty, resentful, moralistic kind of like political axe to grind. There are a lot of people who have essentially built themselves up in this way, and they've taken a major risk, because especially the people that are more obviously disingenuous and kind of ridiculous about it, the only reason that works and the only reason those people get credit and money and attention or whatever is because it's in fashion. But as soon as it goes out of fashion, there's really nothing to hide behind. It's just going to be like their entire body of work is essentially just disingenuous nonsense, right? And it's like they're going to have I think it's possible that some of these people who are seen right now as pretty sophisticated and fashionable and cool, like someone like Sarah Zhang, for instance, not to call names, you know, I don't have any beef with anyone, but someone like that, I think she's kind of emblematic of this type of person. I think it's conceivable, actually, that in the not too distant future, people like this are suddenly, they have the cultural capital of like some like gossip blogger who worked for Gawker a few years ago, you know, like that kind of, their status might become something like that in the not too distant future, but who knows?
Oh God, that would be great.
Well, you know what's funny, Angela, what you were saying about how there are all these people who really had their lives destroyed way before anyone was paying attention to this stuff. It's a really good point, actually, that not a lot of people make, and it's not acknowledged enough, because you're talking about writers, and I'm actually, you made me start to think about all the people who are even less well off than, you know, educated writers, like back in the Occupy days, which was when I first kind of got deeply kind of invested in kind of the social justice warrior kind of tendency. Like I was actually pretty much, I was drinking the Kool-Aid pretty hard for a few years, like in the post-Occupy years. And at that time, way before anyone in the mainstream was kind of paying attention to any of these issues, there were at least hundreds of people, you know, maybe thousands. Obviously, the radical left is a relatively small kind of group of people, but there were lots of people in those years when this kind of identity politics insanities first started brewing, who really had their lives destroyed. And they were like not even educated. They weren't writers. They weren't anyone. They were just people who were committed to trying to make social movements. Some of them were even like homeless. I mean, we had a kind of big collective warehouse in Philly in the Occupy period, and we hosted and I lived with a lot of people who were, you know, essentially kind of vagabonds, like people who were really kind of dedicated to trying to build radical social movements. They were really good people, and they wanted to fight for justice in different ways, but they weren't educated and they weren't like verbally fluid, right? And these people, there were a lot of those people who actually had their name destroyed and had their kind of emotional livelihood and their entire like group social identity decimated by like college educated activist types who were armed with certain highfalutin theories and who were very verbally fluid, who essentially shit on like uneducated, less well-off activist people because they didn't know how to play the verbal games of, like what Judith Butler thinks and all of that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to pour a little liquor out for all the fallen homies who
Yeah.
who suffered from this stuff like way before it was even cool to even know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this stuff will come out in the memoirs of the future, I think, but it has been forgotten. I mean, even when I saw some people kind of writing about the anti-woke left thing, I was thinking, this has been tried before and people did not survive it,
So when you mentioned the anti-woke left thing, are you talking about that that image that was floated around this past week?
What was that?
I'll have Ben bring it up if he can find it. Did you find it, Ben? Someone made. Did you have to tell me something about it?
Yeah, there's a super chat.
Okay, cool. We'll get to the super chat in a minute. This past week, I don't even know what the provenance of this thing is, but there was basically an image someone made that was grouping all of the quote unquote anti-woke left people into ethnic categories, basically.
Oh yes, I did see that.
You did see that.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny and quite apropos for this.
I think me and you are in the same category.
Yeah, I was wondering if you noticed that. And it is actually kind of an interesting question. I saw that Anna Kachian, if that's how you pronounce it, sorry if it's not, she tweeted something that I thought was kind of quite interesting and provocative and possibly true, which is she said something to the effect that what if IDPOL turns out in the long run to be essentially this kind of waspy maneuver against like off-white white people? And because if you look at that graph, it's basically, you can kind of make the case that maybe there is a kind of correlation here where it's like the anti-woke left are people who are often white, but from like non-WASP white backgrounds or something like that. I wonder if there's anything to that.
Yeah, I think there's, it's funny. When I wrote the book, I was still in Ireland at the time, and Ireland is, still very like ethnically homogenous and everything. Most people are not only white, but they're like Irish Catholic, and so in a way, there was a lot of things about America, but I was writing about this primarily American phenomenon or a phenomenon coming from America. And then when I came here first, kind of as an adult, like I was actually born here, but when I came back as an adult, I remember a friend showing me around the neighborhood that I was staying in, and it was like, this is the Ukrainian neighborhood, and this is the whatever. And I kind of, realized that in a way, the what I had been kind of trying to do, me and lots of other people too, which is kind of like reorient the left towards social class and away from identity, that there was an element of naivety in that, because America is absolutely steeped in identity, all these really complicated identity issues that are kind of part of everyday life. And so something like this, I would not really have been aware of back then, but now I can really see it. I find myself even, it's awful, I hate it, but I find myself even kind of noticing people's last names and stuff like that. And I do find that if a person has an Irish last name, they're more likely to like me, but yeah, I thought the one thing that was interesting in the article was the kind of the breakup of the New Deal coalition and the move into kind of like, I guess the Clintonite like progressive neoliberalism, where you have the elite of every ethnic group has a kind of seat at the table. Kind of reminds me of Walter Ben Michael's book about diversity. That in place of real material equality that the majority of people benefit from, in a system in which the majority of people are so disempowered they may as well not exist, basically, as far as real power goes, and real decisions that take place in politics and so on, that the people making those decisions are all part of that top 10%, and so their attitude is, and this also applies to women too, women who got into the elite through either formal or informal kind of affirmative action kind of things, getting more women, whether it's in the boardroom or more women directors or whatever it might be, like to those individual women, they have a reason to support this project because they will directly in their life benefit from it,
Right.
Now here's an interesting thing. A lot of the anti-woke left are also female this time around. And that, I wonder if you have any theories on that, but I think that that may have to do with the fact that now there is this kind of set of women who can't who can't get into these elite positions because they don't want to go along with what they would have to say ideologically in order to be considered an acceptable member of that identity group.
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting observation. And you know what? I actually do have at least one possible theory on that. Before I do that, there's a super chat from someone. Could you tell us about it, Ben? I'm going to have you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. It's from Elliot Rosenstock for $1.99 American dollars. And howdy, Justin. What's Angela's take on China resisting liberal democracy and suppressing protests?
All right. So I don't know if you know Elliot. He's another Zero Books author, and he's kind of in my internet circles. Did you hear the question, Angela? Would you like to riff on that if you have anything to say about it?
Well, I will admit that I actually haven't been following this terribly closely, to be honest. But I mean, it does have the look of a American subversion, possibly, or it doesn't look like a very organic form of protest. And I'm just very suspicious, honestly, I'm very suspicious of anti-China propaganda, not because I think, the Chinese government are, without flaws or something like that. Again, there's no point in saying that. People are going to say, but I am suspicious of it. I mean, just a little while ago, I was watching this documentary about Steve Bannon.
Mm-hmm.
And towards the end of it, this Chinese billionaire appears who's like involved in funding his political project, who obviously wants to subvert the Chinese government, right? Because they want to do what they did in Russia and just, own all of the resources that get privatized off. So I'm very suspicious of that. And I find it weird when I hear, even, Tucker Carlson, who I've been on his show and I like him personally and I agree with him on certain things. But it is something I hear all the time, which is kind of in kind of American political commentary, which is, China are trying to outdo America in certain ways, and through tariffs and so on, and they're trying to. And I always think, but yeah, because they're the Chinese government. Like, obviously, they're going to do what's best for China. That's what they're supposed to be doing. They don't have some obligation to make the American economy better. I mean, that's not. Yeah. So I'm just very suspicious. I mean, honestly, American foreign policy, anything that whenever I see a color revolution or anything that looks like that, I'm just deeply suspicious of it immediately.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy instinct. I think that's a healthy instinct. I mean, I definitely do think, I don't want to go on too long of a tangent on China, but I definitely do think that there's something weird going on with I don't know. I actually think that the kind of Trumpian discourses on China kind of make some sense in that, like, China probably is threatening to really like take over world dominance from the United States. And like, I'm not really into world dominance stuff. Like, that's not like my most motivating political issue, that to see America dominate the world. But it is increasingly clear, I think, that China is on track to take global hegemony from the United States in the not too distant future. And it is a little strange that American elites actually don't talk about it more. I've always thought, and I think like Trump kind of pushing these buttons. My thinking is kind of like, yeah, what's taken American elites so long? Like, of course. And I do find something kind of dubious. I guess what I'm kind of trying to imply is that I feel like there is something in the kind of American liberal elite where they are actually quite content to sell off the assets of the United States country and population to the highest foreign bidders. and get rich doing it and not really care about what the fallout is. I guess I do think there's something kind of going on there.
Yeah, I think that's very, very possible. I mean, they're much more obsessed with Russia, for example.
Right. And as far as I can tell, I mean, what's your take on that? That seems like it's pretty much empty. That's like the whole threat of Russia discourse and meme. Am I right in understanding that it's essentially the way everything's shaken out? It's essentially just like the most mainstream successful conspiracy theory that we've had launched. It's like the conspiracy theory you believe in if you're an educated, sophisticated person, but it's pretty much like pretty empty. That is my understanding. What's yours?
Yeah, absolutely. And after it was really shown to be a conspiracy, they just moved on and just acted like acted like they hadn't, done a totally, Alex Jones level conspiracy, but and there's no apologies, there's no explanation given. Everyone just moved on, and
Yeah, right.
yeah.
So you asked a question before about why is it that it seems a lot of the kind of current leaders of the anti-woke tendencies are women. And you asked if I had any theories about that. And, I have actually thought about that a little bit. And I think one of the reasons for that is one of the ways I've kind of interpreted the social justice warrior phenomenon is in part, it's a kind of tactic whereby a certain type of young woman with a certain set of personality traits or assets, let's call them, is able to basically able to punish traditional forms of female power, not to be too kind of sexist or trad about it, but namely kind of sexual power, the charisma and the power of being cool, being sexy, being seductive. And in some ways, the social justice warrior phenomenon is like was largely driven, or is still, and to some degree driven, by educated, kind of verbally fluid young women who are kind of using this like moralism as a way to advance themselves at the cost of traditional female powers, if you will. And I think what you're kind of seeing now is attractive young women who actually don't care that much about moralism and like to just be relaxed and funny and be free and whatever, and they have a sense that they're kind of attractive and they know their charms and they know their powers. These women are kind of saying, yeah, I'm not going to go along with this whole social justice warrior thing because it's a huge dampening effect on my assets, which are different kinds of assets. And
you've put it in such a generous and delicate way.
Well, I mean,
I think Anna Katchin just said it's just you mad because you ugly.
that's a concise way. Well, I was an academic for 6 years, so
no, I know what you mean, and I think that's true. I mean, again, like, it's funny, the last wave of anti-woke left, I remember noticing these like characters appearing more and more, and they were very much the people who have now taken over, those people that you're saying, the like very scolding kind of people who have this, kind of ingenious like social intelligence,
Right.
that I simply can't. I can think about this, I can think about this every waking hour, and I will still not be able to work out how they did it or how they are able to completely transform the social world around them. But they did, and a lot of them are just otherwise intellectually totally mediocre, to be generous. But they have that skill, and they're networkers, and they're able to bend. They're able to, on the one hand, I guess it's like carrot and stick. They're able to have the threat of, if you go against this, we will socially isolate you. We will accuse, if you're a male, we will accuse you of being a sexual predator. We will, and a lot of times, if you're a political person, particularly if you're kind of political monomaniac, your whole social world is political people. So if you can isolate someone politically, you're completely isolating them socially.
Right.
And then so there's that threat, and then they also have the reward, which is, if you just do what we want, you can have a career, you can have this entire social world around you that will, benefit your life in so many ways. But yeah, that is true. And I always thought, like, why is it that these characters who I completely dismissed because they were just so unimpressive and so kind of nondescript, but I didn't know that they had these magical powers that the rest of us didn't have to kind of like manipulate the social world, as I said. And yeah, that's right. They definitely were able to take away, I guess, the social power that existed, kind of, that they were trying to overthrow, which was that you had to be charismatic or smart or something like that, or you had to, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And this is also, by the way, one of the reasons why I'm quite bullish on the current anti-woke left rising up right now, because in my view, I mean, once you have hot young lefty women going anti-woke, it's game over, I think, because a lot of the submission to the social justice warrior nonsense is young men who want to get laid.
Yes.
And I mean, I definitely, this even applied to me. Like I'm married and I've been married for 6 years now. But when I first met my wife, like we were both essentially social justice warriors. And I like to have any chance of dating her, let alone being really accepted by her, let alone marrying her eventually. I really had to, at that time, I had to really submit very hardcore to kind of constant supplication to the social justice warrior gods. I mean, constantly. I was like, I had to show that I was not a bad person, that I was not a fascist, that I was not racist, not sexist, and pro-feminist. I mean, for the first like 2 years of our relationship, essentially. Yeah. I mean, I actually have I do have a book project about this. It goes into really funny, gory detail about it's like pretty crazy personal experience I had with this. But be that as it may, the point I'm getting at is simply that a lot of the submission to social justice warrior nonsense from like the larger mass of people who are into it is just from young men who want to get a partner and they want to get laid and they want to hopefully one day get married and maybe have a family. Like they're basically falling over themselves to satisfy the political requirements of the educated women around them.
Yeah.
And
It's absolutely no doubt.
yeah,
I mean, I've seen that just like relentlessly for the last couple of years, and in some cases, like in a zombie movie, when like a character has to accept that their dear friend or their husband or wife or whatever is gone, right? It's like that. It's like when a male friend on the left gets like a woke girlfriend, you just have to say it's like they're dead. You just have to say they're gone now. They're going to change all their opinions. They're going to disavow you. They're going to suddenly be saying things that they were laughing at with you just recently. So I mean, and it's true. I mean, on the one hand, part of me thinks you bloody cowards, like, if you wouldn't be such a bunch of cowards, we wouldn't have to all go through this. But on the other hand, I accept that, like, that is true. It is kind of, if your whole social world is political, it is absolute social death and romantic as well.
Right. Now, that's a good point you make, and it's totally fair. But I do kind of want to represent for young men who are kind of stuck in this situation where they feel like they have to be constantly cucking themselves verbally just to get laid. There is a way out. Like, it's not all zombie death apocalypse. It's because as I said, I mean, I was deep in it.
Yeah.
And once my wife and I, once I fully proved to her that I'm not a bad guy and that I'm, not sexist, racist asshole, and I would never hurt her or anything like that. Once that level of trust was officially established and we got married, and then we had to actually deal with the realities of practical life, all of a sudden the social justice warrior crap, like, it made no sense. And it was such an obvious handicap to our functioning as like happy, healthy, productive, married people that we both had to unlearn it. And we did, radically. Like, we're still basically kind of lefties. We're still pretty much lefties. I mean, but we've both pretty much completely relinquished the identity politics and the kind of SJW insanity stuff. And so it is possible. It is possible for people to kind of drink that Kool-Aid, fall deep into absolute cuckery, and then kind of get the girl, convince her you're solid, and then persuade her out of the social justice warrior stuff. It is possible. You kind of do it together, and you do it in large part because it's really, really impractical. And when you're actually trying to like put together a marriage or a household or something like that, you rapidly realize a certain amount of gender roles are actually really, really useful sometimes. And if you try to basically rewrite the entire script of how to have a relationship, you're going to spend most of your entire life like trying to reinvent the wheel, and it sucks doing that. But that's a whole nother tangent.
Yeah, and I don't want to say I have no sympathy for. I mean, I'm sometimes it's disappointing when somebody who absolutely doesn't believe any of this stuff transforms overnight. That is annoying. But at the same time, I'm totally sympathetic with the situation that they're in.
Right.
And the thing is, I know, like from personal experience, it's not an irrational fear. Like they really will go to the ends of the earth to personally destroy you. That is just this poison that's there on the left. And these guys are not imagining that, that really will happen. One of the things, I think you're right when you say that. So I guess that's what you're thinking, like when the women change, that incentive will be gone.
I think so. Like, this is why I'm so supportive of the Red Scare girls. And I think Anna and Dasha are really cool and a really good thing to see right now, because they're young, they're hot, they're smart and funny, and they are solidly leftist in their dispositions and their preferences, but they're just completely exiting the whole kind of moralism and political correctness.
Yeah.
And I mean, once that, and they're succeeding, right? Kind of like economically and with their cultural influence, they're growing and succeeding. And once even a few projects or personas such as theirs are successful, I really think it's the beginning of game over, because there are lots of other, funny, interesting, smart, attractive people who are going to much prefer that type of model, if only it can be cracked open by like a few early starters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right about that. I want that to happen so badly. I'm almost afraid to put too much faith in it happening, but fingers crossed. I hope it does, because it's been like a pretty horrible couple of years, actually. Like, and I think also, like a few years ago, I would have had much greater ambitions about kind of like, or I had much greater belief in, we can reform the left in all these ways and stuff like that. And increasingly, I kind of feel like a really important thing now is just something that sounds simple, should be simple, but is just making it possible again for people who are, whatever their political background, intellectually curious people who are interested in ideas and want to be able to talk freely about things. We have to make that happen, because
Hell yeah.
It's miserable. You can't talk about anything, and that's why there's no interesting writers. There's nothing of interest in public life now. I mean, just to think, I used to be constantly, like, always excited about like a new movie that's coming out, a new novel that's coming out. I subscribed to all the long form book review magazines. I was like constantly engaged in that stuff. And now I just wouldn't bother, because I already know what I'm going to see when I open it up, and I know that nobody in there is being honest.
It is really, really dark realization, which I think a lot of people who are outside the kind of prestigious institutions, not to sound like a snooty asshole or anything, but like if you're outside, if you've never had a perch in the prestigious institutions, it's really hard to convey the horror of that kind of realization, where like you work really hard throughout your youth and young adulthood to kind of crack into prestige circles, and then you get there and you're kind of like, you look behind the curtain and you're like, you got to be kidding me. This is like this it's empty. It's a vast desert. It's a vast desert of nothingness, and just the most pathetic kind of optimization of bullshit social appearances. It's extremely vacuous, and you have to kind of arrive in it to really appreciate that, because until you do, you look up to it, you imagine that, like, oh, to be a professor, to be a tenured professor, surely there are wonderful cocktail parties, and you have wood paneling on your library walls, and you talk with interesting people all the time. You have to actually be lucky enough to break into that to actually realize how deeply it's all been evacuated. I mean, it's pretty amazing and quite depressing, honestly.
Oh yeah, and think of it this way too. I mean, the old question, reform or revolution, I mean, always hinges upon, is an institution reformable? And honestly, looking at academia right now, given that these people have tenure and they're probably going to be in there for life, I honestly think it's not even reformable. It's so bad. There's like, I have a PhD, and honestly, I wouldn't even bother applying for an academic job because I'll never get to say anything. I'll never be able to speak freely. And I mean, I'm not going to go through all the stuff, but the ridiculous bureaucratic stuff, the journal articles that nobody reads, and so you're just taking part in completely pointless conversations where everyone is utterly fraudulent. There's probably a few old people hanging on there at the very end of their careers who got in when it was still kind of free, but it's absolutely rotten. Down to the core, there's nothing there. And as you say, it is a horrifying moment, when you realize like everything, publishing is like this, the media is like this. It's like, it's a pretty disastrous situation.
Right. It's really important to stress like how bad it is. But then on the other hand, I feel a little guilty sometimes because I do have some friends still in academia, and there are really cool, smart people, but they're just institutionally and structurally cucked so bad so it's not a personal attack on people. Like, and that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of doing what I'm doing, and why I have a slightly evangelist kind of attitude, because I do know really smart, interesting, creative, awesome people in academia and in these different types of institutions who are not able to do half of what they could do if they really cut loose. And part of me is kind of motivated to kind of try to like prod them and push them to I don't know, cut loose a little bit more. And
Camille Paglia gave a talk. I think it was a talk she gave in Chicago once, around the time Glittering Images came out, and she was she was getting annoyed, right, at people just leaving academia for this reason, because she was saying, every generation has to topple the kind of fossilized ideologies that came before and so on. But I don't know. I mean, if I thought that was possible, I would probably be in there trying to do it. But
right. Oh yeah, we had another super chat. Sorry, I forgot. Oh shit. Okay, so to the people who submitted the super chats, sorry that I neglected it. We're still working on the system. So Ben, would you like to read them? Angela, we have some questions from.
Okay. Yeah, we have one for Angela, one for you.
All right, so go ahead.
So, okay. First question for $2 is asked by Paul George Malcop. Angela, do Scots-Irish people count as Irish?
I think Scots-Irish is not an expression that's used in Ireland. And so I could be wrong about this because I'm not really into this stuff very much. But to the best of my understanding, the Scotch-Irish are kind of like the Ulster Irish, right? Who were the kind of planter stock, who are make up the majority of the Ulster Protestants. So in Irish terms, they're not seen as being part of the Irish like republic, the ethnic group that makes up the majority of the Irish Republic, basically. And in many ways, you could even say they're sort of enemies, because of the conflict in the north and so on. So, but then when you come to America, that all changes. Like I remember my dad telling me, my parents immigrated to America and settled in Houston, where I was born. And I remember my dad telling me that they went to some kind of Irish cultural organization, and that there was this guy there who was from, he was like from Ulster Protestant background, and he totally saw himself as just Irish. Meanwhile, at home, it was like not long after a civil war, where they really didn't see themselves as part of the same nation. So, long story short, kind of.
Are you from a Catholic family, Angela?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good answer. That's way more of an answer I could have given. I'm just an ignorant Irish American.
I think the Appalachians are sort of Scotch-Irish, right?
Better.
Like, I think that's the...
Oh, Ben says that's where his family's from. Yeah. Do you want to read the other question?
Okay, yeah. This is directed at you, Justin, by Michael X for $5. Justin, woke leftists have joined the Israel lobby in dogpiling Tulsi. What motivates these wasps?
Say it one more time.
Okay, woke leftists have joined the Israel lobby in dogpiling Tulsi. What motivates these wasps?
Okay, so the implication is, you're right, the woke people are piling on Tulsi for being anti-Semitic, or what is the? I don't.
Woke leftists have joined. Yeah,
I guess that's. I guess.
Michael X was one.
I have no theories on that. I don't pay attention to contemporary political news. I've said this many times before, but I think that all of the contemporary elite political circus is in such late stages of terminal cancer that and the media is just basically so unreliable and useless that I've pretty much genuinely quit paying attention to day-to-day affairs of anything having to do with contemporary politicians. So that's the honest truth. I could fabricate some kind of pithy and maybe interesting answer to that question, but I have to, I think, be honest that by the way, I think like what I'm saying will become increasingly normal for like truly educated, thoughtful people. For a while, it was like reading the news and being up to date on political affairs of the day was correlated with education and status. But I think increasingly the mark of education and status will be being like quite oblivious to all of the noise that goes on a daily basis, because I think that is essentially what it is. I mean, I guess I could comment very roughly on anti-Semitism or claims of anti-Semitism today. I'm not even sure if that's what the questioner is getting at, but I mean, I'd be curious to know what Angela thinks about this, but like, I think a lot of the, like in the UK, there have been all these scandals about how like Corbyn and the Labour Party has this like anti-Semitism crisis. And I kind of just don't buy it. Like, I think it's quite fabricated. I just don't think my view on this is kind of similar to my view on like alarmism about like white nationalism. I think it's just wildly overestimated its prevalence. Like, I don't think that there's much widespread hatred towards Jewish people. Like, I just don't think it exists as much as people try to hype it up as existing. Sure, of course, no, it exists in pockets for sure. I'm saying in the Western countries, I don't really buy that anti-Semitism is this like live wire that deserves much attention. Personally, my sense is that it's just yet another kind of instance of this kind of cultural political entrepreneurship where like people just basically find some kind of identity axe to grind to promote themselves. I mean, think about it this way. Have you ever met someone who in casual conversation at all, like said, oh yeah, those Jewish people, they're really fucking scummy? You have? Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. They exist for sure. But in my experience, I know I've almost never encountered actual anti-Semitism personally. Obviously you can't generalize from, a small sample of one person, but if anti-Semitism were this like major problem, racking the culture, I think we would see it a little bit more often. Yeah. So I don't know. I
know that question was for you, but I might just say a word in that.
Yeah, please.
The Corbyn anti-Semitism thing. I mean, I don't know if you saw the documentary. It's like a real hit piece documentary. I think it was a Panorama thing, which was done about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And, it's funny because so you and I and lots of other people like Zizek and various people are kind of like in this very unfortunate position of being like left-wing but critics of PC in certain ways, to put it simply. And what ends up happening is that people on your own side attack you, and then you become the kind of one leftist that conservatives like, that kind of thing.
Right. But
conservatives absolutely disgraced themselves and showed themselves to be totally without principle in that whole Corbyn anti-Semitism thing, because that attack against Corbyn, which was so obviously orchestrated and dishonest, had every single feature of the stuff that they complain about with the social justice warriors. It had people crying in the documentary. It had people saying they're going to kill themselves because they can't stand all the anti-Semitism. It had, the claim to identity politics, all of that stuff that all of these British conservative commentators have spent years claiming they're against. And now when it comes to a person they don't like, Corbyn, getting totally unfairly treated, and all of these elements are present, they have nothing to say about it, nothing critical to say about it. So, you have to be principled about this. Like, I'm happy to be principled about it, even when it's somebody on my side.
Right.
But I didn't see any of them do the same thing to defend Corbyn.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Was there another one?
The only exceptions in Britain, the only exceptions I think in Britain are Peter Hitchens and I don't know if I'm probably pronouncing it the Irish way, which is wrong, but Peter Oborne or Oborne. They're both very good, and they're both good anti-war kind of conservatives, and they are kind of principled on this. But in general, there were no principled defenders of Corbyn there, and it clearly was just totally unfair. And I simply don't believe that any of these people genuinely think Corbyn is an actual anti-Semite.
Right.
I just don't believe that. That's just not. And they're lying. They don't like his political project. They want to get rid of him, and this is the best they could come up with. They tried the IRA thing. They tried the sexism thing. It didn't quite stick, so they ran with this. As for Tulsi, I really like Tulsi, and I think she has, she gets attacked a lot, and she's handled it very gracefully and with a great deal of dignity. And she's I actually think she's a very good role model for women, in part because she never talks about women's issues, because she has other interests. But in a strange way, that kind of makes her a good role model. And I quite like the fact that she's very morally rooted, like she has things that she believes in, and she's principled, basically. I think in terms of the question, like why the woke left is not supporting her, I think she is kind of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I totally love her, I think it's great and everything, but she is kind of a throwback a little bit to an older version of the left, like the left around the Iraq War period, when anti-war politics really dominated it. I think that has gone, and that is, that's worrying. I don't know, for example, if America goes to war with Iran, let's say that happens, it's not that hard to imagine. Mm-hmm. I don't know where, I don't know. I think all the old anti-war voices would be kind of gone. Or, think about, there are people like Jimmy Dore and kind of these older characters who've stayed the same ever since. So definitely that anti-war streak in the left has been eroded somewhat. And so Tulsi doesn't really fit in anymore. They don't recognize her as being one of them,
Great answer. I think we had another, did we?
Yeah, follow up.
All right, Ben.
From the same questioner. Okay, this is a slight change of tone, and it's a comment directed towards you, I think, or a word of advice. For $2, cash for steroids to aid your desoyification. Michael F.
They're giving me money so that I can afford to buy steroids to be less of a soy boy.
There was soy intake and your.
Yes. These are common recurring themes in the chat here.
Hey, on the left, you're high tea.
Yeah, for sure. You think I'm a soy boy? Let me introduce you to some people I know from the good old days. Well, thank you. What was his name?
Michael X, the same guy.
Well, Michael X, thank you for your generous contribution. For $2, I could probably afford like 1/10 of a dose of steroids. I don't even know how it works, but I did do a little research for like 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then I learned that it makes it harder to have kids, I think, or like it lowers your sperm count. That's what it does. I'm probably going to try to have kids sometime in the next few years, hopefully. So if my life doesn't go terribly down the drain, which it might, hopefully we'll want to have kids. So although it'd be fun to get really jacked really quickly, I want to preserve the sperm count. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of this is just extreme cases or whatever, but I have seen people, like famous people and stuff like that, turn into total emotional wrecks because steroids like have, you're on this emotional roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
So there's these like jacked guys like crying, on because they have a breakdown when they're, I don't know, they stop
hilarious.
taking it or something like that.
Yeah. So I decided against it. I considered it for 1 minute on Twitter the other day and quickly rejected it. Cool. Okay. So, hey, Angela, we play this game on the show in the middle of these live streams where I'm going to say a bunch of entities to you. And then your job is to just tell me one of two answers: based or cringe.
Mm-hmm.
Are you game to play this?
Yes.
Right. Of course, it goes without saying, you and I both are highly sophisticated, nuanced individuals with very complex perspectives on everything, and very few things are black and white. However, it is just fun sometimes to, cut through the noise. And by the way, based doesn't necessarily mean you fully agree with everything. And cringe doesn't mean you fully hate everything someone thinks or some entity or event represents. It's just, this is the primary cleavage in contemporary digital culture, based or cringe. And every now and then you have to kind of line up, and it's just kind of fun. So are you ready?
Yeah.
By the way, you're more than welcome to decline on
Okay, good. Because
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No pressure. This isn't to put you in the hot seat. The first one is Sargon of Akkad.
Oh, that's terrible. I don't want to answer that because I've actually met him and he was perfectly nice.
This is why I was curious about your overall view, but you can decline, as I said.
Well, I mean, I just don't accept that I have to dislike someone personally who I think is wrong politically. I mean, I think he's totally wrong. In fact, the idiots, of course, just said, oh, Nagle is talking to him and therefore agrees with him. The whole point of debating him is that I disagreed with him. But, also in many ways, I would say that perspective, that kind of trying to revive classical liberalism thing, is probably the project I disagree with most of any, in many ways. I disagree with it very profoundly. I think that liberalism is the problem, and I really agree with a lot of the social justice warrior stuff is described by kind of libertarians and different people who dislike it as illiberal. But I think that John Gray wrote a very good piece about it. He was calling it like hyper-liberalism, he was describing it much more as an acceleration of things that are already there within the ideology. And I think that's absolutely true. And so I just think that attempt to revive classical liberalism is just totally not, I mean, you can already see it's not going anywhere, right? And he's still getting the same amount of backlash that he would if he was, a Nazi or something like that. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm so bad at this game.
It is a difficult thing to give an overly simplistic and reductionistic answer. But sometimes it's fun. So the next one is the 1916 Easter Rising.
Oh, based.
I agree. Oh, sorry, it's not about me though. How about Kanye West?
I don't really have a very strong opinion on Kanye West, honestly.
Oh, you don't got that dragon energy?
No, I mean, I know he was sort of a MAGA person for a while, and then he had some kind of mental issues, or maybe he didn't. Maybe they're just making him look crazy. I don't know. I honestly have no idea. I know almost nothing about Kanye West.
Yeah, me too, but it doesn't stop me from saying based on Kanye. I'm not a MAGA person at all. Like, I don't support Donald Trump. I'm not a fan, but I think Kanye is cool. Yeah, based for me. But sorry, I keep telling my answer, but it's not about me. All right. What about?
No, please do. It takes the heat off me.
Okay, cool. It is kind of fun for me to add too, so I'll play also. How about the American Revolution?
Huh. It seems wrong to call a revolution cringe.
Right.
I guess based.
I agree. Based. I have a soft spot for the founding fathers and kind of mystique of the American revolutionaries. I think it's based. How about black pudding?
Oh, based. I love black pudding.
I cannot eat that.
The concept of it is awful. I agree. The blood-soaked thing. It's black, like with blood, but it's delicious.
For people who don't know what we're talking about, it's a delicacy in the UK and Ireland. It's basically oats soaked in pig's blood, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, they eat it in Spain as well. It's very nice. They actually, it's even more. It's a bit more like spiced there, but it's yeah.
I have an extremely provincial working class American palate, so be that as it may.
So what would that be? Just like burgers and stuff?
Yeah, like I hate vegetables. I like things like ketchup and mostly just eat meat and cheese and stuff. I like things like like Kraft singles and whatever. So how about the subreddit Stupid Paul?
Oh, based,
yeah. I wasn't sure if I would
I do worry though, because I think Reddit communities tend to all go one way, and it's not good, it's always in the wrong direction.
I was just about to say that obviously I'm team based on our Stupid Paul, but however, I think most organizations or projects or entities that are based on opposition to something usually go pretty bad in the long run. Like I don't really base anything on an opposition. I think any community that is organized around disliking something, and this is a community that's organized around disliking identity politics, usually has some bad long-term dynamics. It's hard,
but also just weird stuff that is hard to explain starts to happen, and it just kind of takes over. So I don't want to bring their wrath on, but I remember looking at the Reddit of the Red Scare one, and I thought, oh, it'll be full of really funny people like Anna and Dasha. But it seemed to be full of people who hate Red Scare.
It's really weird. That's a unique one. I've never seen anything like that. I had Dasha on the podcast here a few weeks ago, and I saw the thread that was about our discussion, and wow, I have very, very thick skin that I've cultivated, but this one actually kind of shook me for a minute, and I actually felt bad for Dasha. I was like, I don't know what I did wrong, but I felt guilty because I was like, I guess I was so stupid or annoying that I really upset her fan base. I actually felt moved to send her a quick DM saying like, hey, I don't know what exactly went on, but if I'm sorry if like I really upset your fans or something. Like if I was an asshole to you or like I was bad in some way I didn't understand, just wanted to say sorry that it seems your fans fucking hated me so much. And she was like, oh no, they're always like that. They're just notably vitriolic at all times. That's very strange. Like there's something weird going on there sociologically that you don't. That's a unique thing. Like, obviously there's a lot of vitriol on the internet, but I've never seen a subreddit organized around someone else's work that is even vitriolic towards the people that they're organized around.
Yeah, sometimes they're doing it in a funny way, right? Because they're mimicking, particularly Anna's sense of humor, where she's like, both of them actually, part of their sense of humor is very cruelly mocking themselves. So some of it, maybe it started as a joke and it just became, they started doing it for real then, but yeah, it was pretty vicious. My theory, and I have no data for this, but the hunch I got was that one reason why maybe their subreddit is so vitriolic is I was kind of thinking that it must be like really thirsty, frustrated men who are like just raging and seething with like unsatisfied longings of various kinds or something. I don't know. That's just a guess, but I honestly don't know. It's very strange.
Who knows? All right, just a few more, Angela, then you're out of the hot seat. How about the Chinese Communist Party? Arguably the most successful and powerful communist movement on the planet.
Based.
Yeah. Are you cool on? Are you? Or I should say, you're warm to the CCP?
Yeah.
All right, interesting. That's kind of surprised me. I thought you'd come down on that. And just one more, and this also has to do with the Far East. The concept of, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I think you say sakoku, which is the Japanese term for essentially the extreme isolationism that was practiced in Japan for about 200 years from around the 1630s. They basically, this is a question that's kind of prodding your anti-open borders position. Japan practiced extreme isolationism for about 200 years from around, I think it was 1630s it started. And basically no foreign nationals were allowed in whatsoever. And also no Japanese people were allowed to leave. And they did this for like 200 years under, I think it was the Tokugawa shogunate, if I recall correctly. So this is an extreme form of closed borders, base for cringe, Angela.
Oh no. Well, I just can't say cringe. I mean, I would say that. See, I'm not playing the game right if I refuse to say one or the other, but I'll just say what I think about it. Sorry, I suck at this game.
Fine, yeah.
Obviously that was a way of, or one of the effects of that was that it kept Japan very culturally distinct. And one of the reasons that people go there today and are totally blown away by it and totally in awe of its culture and stuff like that is because it's so distinct, and it's so beautiful, and they retained all of those things, and that's one of the ways they did it. I mean, there's just no. The thing is, like, if you have a multicultural society, then the culture that dominated kind of before it became multicultural is going to be less unique in some way. It's going to be more like a kind of global culture. People often say now that like all cities have started to look the same, that kind of thing. So that is real, and that is a significant loss that you can't really deny. Now that it doesn't follow from that that's the way you have to, that there are no other considerations, or that that's the only way to organize a society. And for much of the world, that's, I mean, almost nowhere is as ethnically homogenous as that now,
right. Yeah.
So, but undoubtedly that's one of the effects, and then there are positive elements of that. I mean, you could say, for example, the GDR did that in its own way, different reasons, right? It wasn't cultural; it was economic. They didn't let people leave to come and go because they understood that they needed, this many thousand engineers by the end of 4 years or whatever it might be. They had to, in extremely hostile circumstances, they had to create a successful socialist economy that was, even though it was linked to the other socialist states, it had to be fairly self-reliant in certain ways. So I mean, there are obviously benefits to doing that. I'm not advocating for it, but there are undeniable benefits. Otherwise, nobody would have ever tried it.
Right. I think it's really funny when Westerners, especially kind of like lefty Westerners, go to Japan and then they come back and they're like, "Oh, it was so amazing. It's so unique and interesting and cool." It's like, yeah, it's because it's a fucking ethno state. Like, there's a reason why. And it's not like a very comfortable or easy to integrate political reason. Like I have somewhat reactionary views on this sort of thing because I'm a big fan of like really tight knit, deep community forms. But I mean, I have no interest and never have had any interest in any type of like white people shit. Like I don't care about I don't want ethnic. I don't want my bond to be based on ethnicity at all. I've never been interested in it, but I totally understand why there are like white people who are like talking like that. I get the longing for that deep community, and I am into deep community. But it's weird where if you're into like voluntary group community building along particular lines of any kind, it's like that's not allowed because it just sounds even slightly like white nationalist stuff. So you're not even really allowed to have a deep interest in like deep community.
Well, like say for example, if you're like a localist, right? I'm not, but if you are, and you want to have a local community that is tightly knit and that feels enough, where everyone feels enough in common with each other to be a community. I mean, what the nationalists are saying, or I guess more the ethno-nationalists, or maybe you could say it's a cultural thing as well, are saying they're just scaling that to a national level. And it is difficult. It is more difficult to create those kind of deep bonds in not just a multicultural society, but a very, very individualistic one.
Right.
I mean, for example, if you look at America today, like some of the figures I've seen, I was reading recently on loneliness and isolation in America are absolutely shocking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are so bad that honestly, I'm surprised there aren't more shootings and stuff like that going on, because this is not how human beings are meant to be. I mean, it's a level of isolation that you know, I would even say violence is not even the worst element of it. The actual isolation itself is the worst. The fact that there are millions of people out there who have no friends at all, and who don't go outside. I mean, that's what you do to torture somebody. You know, that's what you do to torture a political prisoner or something. So, and that isolation is undoubtedly linked to the fact that America is this experiment of trying to hold together a very diverse society and a secular one, and a one that is very ideologically rooted in individualism. Those are really hard things to hold together, you know?
Right. Right. You know, sometimes I'm a little not so into kind of the popular American trends pushing for socialism, because although I'm very sympathetic to a socialist vision in some ways, I do have this kind of deep fear or suspicion. I wonder what you think about this. I suspect you might be a little bit more close or kind of invested perhaps in like the American kind of socialist movements, although I don't know, I'm just guessing. Like I have this kind of sneaking suspicion that so much of it actually, it's like they want this kind of like community degradation and these isolation dynamics, these like basically the utter increasing degradation of community belonging and people, because it's like that it's from the wreckage of that the voting base for like a socialist movement kind of comes around. Like I often have this feeling that like a lot of the DSA types of people, you know, like one of the reasons that they're really like, whenever I start talking about stuff like more traditional types of values, you know, like family and you know, loyalty and these different types of things, which I actually think are really important for a successful and viable kind of left-wing project. There's a major bias against all such kind of community-oriented traditional values. And I often do suspect, I don't know, but I do suspect that it's because on some level, even if it's unconscious, there's like a lot of the socialists in America, they kind of want this community degradation to continue, because that's what's going to drive people into essentially just signing up for like whatever like AOC wants to like push forward or whatever, you know.
Do you think it's because the only type of community left will be political?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I feel like. And again, this isn't a conspiracy theory. I'm not accusing anyone in particular. And I don't know. I don't have data on this, but I do get that hunch sometimes that like a lot of the American radical left, especially the socialist left, it's like they don't want people, individuals and communities right now to come together and develop like deep autonomous community that lifts people up and solves some immediate lifestyle problems with and for each other. It's like they actually really don't want that, because it probably would take away from the energy behind a kind of socialist project. It would take away votes for a kind of socialist, long-term socialist electoral project. Do you think, is that crazy, or what do you think, Angela?
I think about this a lot. I don't know why. I don't know what is motivating them, to be honest. And I don't know if there are unconscious motivations there as well. But even that book, the author was complaining about me recently on Twitter, and Anna and the other women whose names begin with A. She was saying, oh yeah, she's written this book about abolishing the family.
Right. Yeah, I've had some interactions with her.
And I mean, other people have said this. I think Amber said this in a piece she wrote for Damaged. But that's already happening. Like, if that's what you want, just sit back and let the market do it for you, because that's what's happening. People can't start families, so today's your lucky day,
Right.
And so it's just such an antisocial, and it's so cowardly too, because it's just pushing an open door. Like, this is happening anyway. Like, nobody's going to. There's no force that's going to push back against you for suggesting such a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and none that has any purchase anyway in terms of power and stuff like that. And I just think, if you put together, right, the isolation that I was describing, put on top of that the economic precarity and all of that, put on top of that not being able to have a family. I mean, do they want everyone to just kill themselves? Like, I mean, what do they think people are going to have left?
Well, they're going to have the Socialist Party that is going to, right? I mean, I think that's what it is, right? That's the mental model, isn't it? It's like,
but why would a socialist project be like? To me, what they are proposing is like a level of it's like almost like Ayn Randian, like, it's taking individualism to such an extreme. It's like level that I don't know how I mean, if there's anything even left to disintegrate, I mean, how much social disintegration they think they want. But also, I mean, one of the reasons I've always been a big fan of Christopher Lasch, and one of the reasons I like Tucker, even though people on the left hate him very intensely, is that I think that I've always kind of been drawn to people who hold as a kind of a value that roots a lot of the way they think. So that it's not really about whether something is liberal or conservative or progressive or reactionary. It's whether it is good for society, And so that's sometimes I have even called myself like a conservative socialist or something like that. That's just shorthand, because I have ended up on the conservative line on something like family, but really, I don't care about whether something is liberal or conservative or progressive or reactionary. It's is it good for society? That doesn't mean that you have to absolutely trample all individual rights and just like, throw everyone in prison or whatever. But it does. It's just a basic kind of it's a basic guide, a kind of an ethic of how to put the good of the society above that of the individual as a guiding principle.
Well put. Angela, there was something that I really wanted to ask you, which is switching gears just slightly. Since you wrote the Kill All Normies book, I was curious, since you published that, would you say that political trends have kind of gone in the direction that you were expecting based on your study there, or have you been surprised by how things have gone since the writing of that book?
Well, definitely, of the two sides of the culture war, like the left clearly got the upper hand, in the cultural realm, and a lot of the characters on the right that I was talking about have been purged completely from the internet, basically, like the main characters of the book. I mean, Milo, for example, there's like a chapter on Milo.
Right.
Who's gone now to all intents and purposes. Gavin McInnes was a very big character at the time. Same again. Infowars is gone. Roosh V was kind of another character in the book, and he was mentioned a few times. He's not only. I think he's been wiped off of a couple of platforms and maybe even a payment process or something like that. But he's also totally changed politically.
Yeah.
So all of that has happened. So
Alex Jones too. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and a huge amount has happened. The original 2016 Bernie Bro anti-woke left is gone, and that element of the online right is gone.
Mm. And is that what you were expecting, or did this stuff surprise you, or?
I honestly, yeah, I am actually surprised at the extent to which the wiping people off of the internet has happened. And you know, it's funny because I remember when like you could always, you know, it was almost like clockwork. Whenever there would be a brief moment where the far right would sort of pop up, there would be, you know, a big, you know, like a demonstration or something like that. And you would always have the civil liberties organization saying you know, we defend your right to say it kind of line. And they've kind of disappeared too. I don't really see those kind of libertarians making a huge issue about all of this. And lots of other people have said this, but I think in part it's an ideological thing because it's not the state, you know, restricting the free speech, it's the corporations.
Okay, that's interesting. When you wrote that book, did you have a strong sense that it was going to make a big splash, or were you taken aback by that?
Absolutely not. I had no idea. I would have edited it if I had. I would have edited it properly and put footnotes in if I had. I couldn't possibly have known like that. I mean, if you stacked up all of the reviews and the kind of think pieces about it and the condemnations and so on, it would be like 10 times the size of the book. It's a really short book. Right. A very impressionistic kind of all over the place book. And if I had any idea that it would have had that level of scrutiny, well, I would never have written it because I would have been totally paralyzed. But you know, I guess I learned. I'll do better next time.
I'm kind of curious. Do you have any words of wisdom, or you know, just kind of based on your experiences and observations, do you have any words of wisdom for maybe, let's say, younger intellectuals who might be facing a cancellation?
I think that I think you're right that the academic route is kind of gone now, and the more institutional media route is gone too. And I think that the more you try to cling to those things, if you really are somebody who wants to be honest in any way, you're not going to be able to survive within those institutions, and you're always going to be, you know, telling sort of half truths. So there's kind of no way. There's no simple way out of this. You know, you just have to. You have to go through that horrible experience, and you have to be, as I said, willfully misinterpreted constantly. And there's simply no way around it. There's no. I have thought about this. I have looked at it every way possible. As I was saying to you before, you know, I've sort of totally paralyzed myself with like thinking about, you know, is there any way to get across an idea without getting this reaction? And there simply isn't. In fact, the only way is if you're so irrelevant that nobody notices you've said anything. Right. Which you don't want, obviously, either. So yeah, we all have to just I mean, it's just a dark time. It really is. I mean, there's no. I know you're very optimistic, but and maybe there's things are going to get a little bit better. But it is just a very dark time. You will have, you know, I had, for example, one journalist like call me up pretending to want to verify my age or something like that, and like an idiot because I was totally clueless. I just went okay, and I took the phone call, and of course he was writing a hit piece about me, which where he like leaked stuff from my private Facebook and stuff like that. It was nothing juicy, so it wasn't that bad. But so suddenly then you can't have a private social media page where you hang out with your friends because you don't know who's spying on you. It really does. The impact on your life is going to be really bad. Like, I can't lie and say otherwise. It's going to be very bad, and you have to have at least a few solid people in your life who will stick by you and stuff like that. Maybe you're right. Maybe things are about to get fun and free up a little bit. I hope to God it happens. But for now, that would be it. But, there is the truth, which I think actually matters. And if you can't tell the truth about anything, there's basically no point in being alive. So this is just, you just have to do that. You just have to. And the crazy thing about all of this is I'm not even saying anything.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything outrageous at all. I don't think I've really said anything. Just earlier on, I was watching an interview with this guy. I think his name's Eric Kaufman, and he wrote this this book about identity politics. And if I haven't read the book actually. I'm going to read it as soon as I can. But based on the interview, from what I gather, he's essentially kind of saying the identitarians are right in that, or he's saying it is, a legitimate thing to want to have an ethnic majority within a nation. But I was watching that going, what? Like, if I said this, what would happen? Because like the borders piece that seemed to just drive everyone insane was making a very a very not radical argument, actually. I mean, all it was saying, it was actually, just simply trying to show that there are problems with what I saw as the open borders position, which I knew was coming because I knew that the moral, I've seen how the moral trajectory works. Once you accept the moral framework that any definitional fact of a nation state is evil, then this is where you have to go. So, for example, even you see now the Democrats, like on the debate stage, are all changing their messaging on this. And they're saying their line is now, we shouldn't criminalize people. We should make it some kind of civil something or other. But again, I'm thinking, no, that's not good enough, because why make it anything if no human is illegal and all that stuff? If, in other words, if this is fundamentally wrong, then you can't just give into it in half measure, because your own side are going to eat you alive when it comes to actually making policy decisions.
Right. Now, you said before that it's a very dark period and that you just have to face the fact that all kinds of bad things are going to happen to you if you try to say what you really think. But from a slightly different angle, isn't it actually kind of cool? And it's like you have a kind of a very lucky superpower in some sense, that you can write a fairly, a very reasonable essay that's not I mean, I read that essay, the Open Borders essay. I found it nothing particularly controversial. I thought it was interesting and, probably a needed point being represented at this particular point in time. Even though I'm not actually too like activated or motivated on like the border politics debates, but I was like, okay, totally reasonable case. And I think you're pretty explicit about situating your argument in a very long-standing tradition. I mean, it's like not like you're pulling this out of thin air in some kind of like provocative gesture. You made a very reasonable case that I thought was not that controversial. And yet, when you get all this crazy backlash, it's kind of a gift, isn't it? Like, it's kind of a blessing that you're able to do this, right? Like, because most people, if they write like a fairly reasonable, not overly controversial essay in an article, in a journal or magazine somewhere, most people will, the real problem, the really dark thing for most writers is no one really caring and no one really listening and no one really paying any attention. But for people like you and really for anyone who is willing to really commit themselves to frequently looking for the taboos, looking for exactly what you're not allowed to say, and then actively trying to, push those boundaries. If you're that type of person today, you could say that it's actually a really good time for that type of person, because these social justice mobs, these like outrage mobs, are so predictable and they're so easy to kind of game them. Like you can write an article, you could probably write any article you want, Angela, and make the world go crazy over it. Now, yes, it's going to be in a negative
worst
way.
Superpower ever.
What's that?
The worst superpower ever.
But I don't know. I don't think so. I think what it is it's counterintuitive. It's very confusing and weird because we live in this new digital context where, the way things make us feel is very out of sync, right? So like if you write an article online and it gets tons of hate, right? That our bodies have evolved to experience that as a very bad thing. Like all of our alarm systems go off like, oh my gosh, I'm sad, I'm scared. This is bad in every way. Literally like our physiological systems get triggered in many very bad, painful ways. However, when you actually step back from it and you look at the larger system that we're now embedded in and that we're producing intellectual work in, if you're able to kind of just have the stoicism to basically like brush all of that off, what's really going on, the underlying model, as far as I can tell, is you write something that's obviously true, a bunch of idiot zombies basically do the work of promoting it around the world for you. And then what happens is all of the smart, honest people who might be a little too cowardly to say, frankly, what they think and feel, but they're smart and honest on the inside, and they do have a strong demand for honest intellectual work, and they do respect it and appreciate it when they find it. All of those people are essentially given your article, they're given your message all the more powerfully through the carrier of these like idiot zombie moralist outrage people. And so when you're able to see that system, this is why I'm so much more optimistic, I think, than a lot of people in my position. I mean, I had some pretty, bad experiences. If you look at my case on paper, right? I mean, I basically got pushed out of academia. I lost my job. I mean, I quit at the end. I decided to resign in the final moment. But, I on paper, I suffered pretty badly from this type of culture. But pretty much for me, every step of the way, it was pretty hilarious and fun. And every time something bad happened, more cool, interesting people came my way and sent me messages. And then I just like figured out how to cultivate that good stuff and channel that good stuff and grow that good stuff. And I think like that's what people like you and I, Angela, are going to figure out how to do more and more. And I think we're currently learning very rapidly about how to do it. And once that's kind of hacked out, like once these systems are hacked by intellectuals in the right way, then I think it's really game over. And then it's really off to the races. And that's why, yeah, I'm very bullish. And I think I'm hopeful that we're actually living through a kind of renaissance, possibly. Maybe not yet, but I don't know.
I hope you're right.
Ben, you have a super chat?
$5, but I don't know.
Go ahead. Why is it bad?
Maybe, I don't know. On the topic of controversial things to say in public.
I have to vet this one first. Let's see. Angela's cool. She can handle.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, so
don't be offended, Angela. But this is
let me take the heat.
This is a somewhat offensive question, but right. You can handle it.
Okay. This is a $5 question from Dane Sovic. Does Angela want to have a litter of Aryan kids?
What say you, Angela?
It's funny. I saw a conversation. It's weird when you see what people imagine you're like reflected back to you online, Mm-hmm. And one thing people keep saying about me is that they think I have some kind of maternal vibes. Like I've just seen this repeatedly. People saying like, yeah, that I sound, I don't know, they think I sound maternal or something.
Okay.
But yeah, sure. Yeah.
Nice way to troll the trollers. I like that. Okay, Angela, I don't want to overtax you. I know we've been talking for quite some time, so I don't want to abuse the privilege of having you on. Was there anything we didn't cover that you were amped up to cover by any chance?
Not really, but just before I checked your Twitter to see if the link was up,
Yeah.
And somebody linked to an article, which I was just halfway through reading before I went on. Let me see if I have it. Where is it? No, it's gone. I must have closed it down. But it was this article which was kind of about which was referring to the book, which I mean, I'm very tired of talking about that damn book, but
I didn't want to ask you too much about it. Yeah.
But one of the things that the author was saying was kind of like, it was sort of depicting the way that I wrote about the online world at the time as being kind of moralistic in a way, right? In the sense that it saw the emergence of all of these online communities as this terrifying prospect, you know? But I just want to say, I mean, it's possible. See, unfortunately, again, it's the way in which one is always misinterpreted. You can look at a phenomenon and say there's something quite horrible emerging here, and it doesn't follow from that you want to censor anyone. So I've never argued for censoring people.
Right.
In fact, I've explicitly argued against it on a number of occasions. But it's perfectly possible to hold that position and to say that there is what I saw kind of emerging at the time, and even like I gave an example from the left too, which was this woman laughing about Mark Fisher dying, basically. So what I was trying to get at was that there was this really worrying kind of total lack of empathy, people being almost proud to have no ability to empathize with others at all, and really making cruelty a kind of a badge of honor and stuff like that. And I just saw that as like a really, really negative trend that was happening online, and that did seem to go against the narrative that had been there a few years before around the Arab Spring, which was all cyber utopian. Everyone's going to use their Twitter account for good and this kind of thing, like obviously so that was just an obvious point. I was just saying like that utopianism did start to look ridiculous a few years later. I mean, that's all I was saying. I never have argued for censorship or anything like that. I think too, kind of in the same way, when we were talking about the question you asked about Japan and so on, I think one of the reasons it's become really difficult to talk about anything is because what happens is that people are not really listening to, or they're not really debating what they appear to be talking about. It's what they see if you follow the argument through a few steps ahead, where you will end up. And the thing is, you won't always end up there, So I can say, for example, to me, the most beautiful national culture in the world is Italy. I totally fell in love with the place. It's like unbelievably beautiful. Everything about it is just awesome. And so, I mean, that is a national and ethnic sort of culture and identity, if you like. And I can recognize that and recognize that it would be a sad thing for that to disappear. And it doesn't follow from that I want to ethnically cleanse anyone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like the noble lie, basically. It's what's governing everything now. And we just have to get past that, because there is simply no way of thinking anything through if people are always jumping 10 steps ahead, assuming that you're going to reach, that the only possible conclusion you could ever reach is the most sinister one they can come up with.
That's
and
right.
then they work backwards and don't allow. So, for example, just to have one other example, I remember everyone went really crazy when Tucker did his thing about diversity is not our strength. But I'm sorry, diversity has never been the rallying cry of the left, of socialism, historically. Not never, but we'll say pre-68 or whatever. It was unity. It was solidarity, right? And so he was not saying, again, what they're doing is they're taking his point. He's saying this is an Orwellian statement that doesn't make any sense, and that it's an ideological statement. And he's saying we need to have, there's a million places you can go from there, but let's not pretend that having a nation having absolutely nothing in common on any level is a good thing. What I think socialists should be arguing for is unity and solidarity, unity of purpose and so on, along the lines of class. That's the old-fashioned, way of thinking maybe, but Um, and it can be many other things, I mean, in Ireland, for example, or in modern Nigeria, the dividing line is religious. It's not always racial. But at the same time, like, if you can't have that initial thought, then you can't get on to thinking about the next thing, which may be something very positive. You may be saying, you know, why can't, instead of trying to build a society upon the absolute chaos of individualism, why can't we try to build it upon the common good, for example? That could be the next step in your thinking. It doesn't have to, but in order to get there, you have to recognize the first bit, which is that is a propagandistic statement that doesn't make a great deal of sense if it's really examined. So anyway, basically, that's what I see as the big problem in everything. The thing that's shutting down all critical thinking right now is what people may have good impulses. It may be the noble lie. They think that if they allow these things to be discussed, it will all end in horror, and everyone. I mean, I think that's very misanthropic. They think everyone's going to descend into savagery if they are allowed to think any of these things. But that has to be the first step. I mean, you just have to be able to say, that it doesn't follow, as I said. I can criticize, say for example, in the kind of the online culture wars, there's only two positions allowed. The first is that, on that question of kind of manners, if you will, the first is that there are evil people out there and they need to be censored. The other one is that we don't need to censor anyone, and there is nothing sinister emerging there, or there's nothing to be criticized there. You know what I mean? And it's sort of almost like if you don't take either of those positions, people just assume that it's impossible for you to not be in one camp or the other.
Right.
I mean, in a way, that's really why I've ended up getting in so much trouble, I think, is because I haven't fitted neatly into one or the other. And I just have always reserved the right to not be told that somebody can look into the future and know what my conclusion 5 steps ahead is going to be.
Hell yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like an absolute requirement of anyone who would pretend to be an intellectual. I mean, that's what it means to be an intellectual. And I mean, I could not agree more. And obviously I'm supportive of that. And I know exactly what you're talking about. And, I think it's a good diagnosis about how that's a core problem, is that everyone is basically judging people for chains of inferences that they're making about the person they're listening to. I think you could actually go even a little bit further than what you said, because what you had said was that it's people are judging you for kind of logical implications that come 10 steps down the line. I would say that actually it's often orthogonal even to the logical implications. It's like there's this paranoia where it's like people aren't even looking at the content of what you're saying. It's more like individuals who use this word are therefore in this camp. It's like that brain dead. It's really that brain dead. And so it's like down literally to certain words. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure listeners could easily think of some. So it's like, if you use this word and if the article is not about why this word is bad, that is the evidence that you're on the team that you're not supposed to be on. So I think it's actually like a much more emotional thing. It's not a kind of logical inference process, as you were kind of implying. It's much more of a paranoid, schizophrenic kind of like structure where people are just bouncing wildly off of signifiers in ways that they probably hardly understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, just quickly, I would add that part of me sometimes thinks that an underlying structural factor here is info glut. Like, there's basically too much information now. There's so much information. There's so many people speaking. There are so many events happening on a daily basis. And because we're being inundated with information, we have to be extremely rapid and brutal about how we make judgments. And I think when this intersects with like kind of like not super smart and very like moralistic knee-jerk types of people, it's just a recipe for disaster, because it incentivizes people to make really significant political inferences about someone based on like literally one word in the title. I mean, I think like lots of people do that on a daily basis. So yeah, that's just a bit of an addition to what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, and the real moment we'll know we've made progress is when we don't have to have this conversation. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it has. I'm going to say the R word. It has retarded our thinking so badly that that you can't even get past the first step. In a thought process, you have to stop there and have this crazy like culture war over something again that hasn't actually been said and so on. I mean, imagine how wonderful it would be, given the universities are gone, basically, right? Imagine how wonderful it would be if we were genuinely free to be able to not even have to think about that,
Right. Well, we're getting there, I think. I mean, like even this conversation we're having right now, I mean, we probably, we talked about many things without prefacing our thoughts with apologies and caveats. And I mean, to a degree that we probably would not have been able to do even 2 years ago, maybe. I don't know if that's true, but that's
yeah. So yeah, we're getting there.
We're getting there. I'm hopeful. I mean, this kind of leads to another really good question, which is, Angela, when will you be joining us on the wild, wild west of the open internet? You don't even have a Twitter account.
I know. I kind of made a decision a while back to step away from social media and just generally step away from just to have a kind of a more private and quiet life, basically. And I think that has helped me, and it's seen me through a sort of a bad period that would have possibly driven me crazy. And like, other people were literally driven crazy by this. So not all of them got out of this as unscathed as I have been as a result. So I think that was a very good decision. Having said that, things are looking a little better in some ways, and I can't really hide away from it forever. So I know I will have to go back at some point and have a bit more of a public profile again at some point. I'm not really looking forward to it, but I had this idea to do a podcast at one point, which I think I'm going to revisit. I'm going to try and give that another go. I was kind of a bad interviewer, to be honest, but also I think I said this maybe when I was on Red Scare, or maybe I just talked to them privately about it. I can't remember, but I interviewed Zizek, and he kind of monologued for the whole 2 hours. So I may as well not have even been there.
Right.
I kept trying to get in and interrupt him, but I was so bad. I have very good kind of country manners, so I can't bear to be pushy in a conversation. So I wasn't very good at it, but I guess I can learn. There's so many interesting people out there that I really want to interview. There's I was just thinking recently, I'd love to. This stuff that's going on about Brexit right now. There's a bunch of people, particularly Thomas Fazzi. I think he's really interesting, and a couple of others who are kind of like left-wing pro-Brexit people who I think are very interesting. And I'd love to hear what they have to say about it all, And a podcast is really, for me, it's just an excuse to talk to interesting people,
Definitely. Also, what's cool about podcasts is you don't really have to be a good interviewer. I'm a terrible interviewer. I like to talk too much. That's my problem. But people just learn that's kind of like part of my shtick. That's like what you get on my podcast. If you want like a good interviewer, go somewhere else. If you are also interested in what I think about shit, then listen to my podcast. If you don't, fuck off. That's kind of you can do that, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. You can kind of do whatever you want and see how it works.
But I just think if I went back on Twitter, it would just be a horrible bloodbath.
It is such a hellhole for sure. But it's just useful for like sharing things. Getting the word out when you write stuff and like posting podcasts and stuff like that. Otherwise, no, I mean, your instincts are totally right that it's all of these sites are like psychological hellscapes that if you can avoid it, great. But it is, I think, for a certain type of person, increasingly like the major lifeline for the moment for like being able to cultivate an intellectual life.
And that's the next step, by the way. Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
The next step after you create, this an online space to be able to talk more freely. The next step is creating a real life one. Because one of the things that has made all of this so powerful, as we were saying earlier, is their incredible weaponization of socially isolating people. And, you know, the reason they can do that is because, you know, we don't have any real life networks, you know. So it needs to be, we need to find a way of having, just, you know, I mean, I feel like such a dork saying it, but like, you know, just a space for like open, you know, discussion of ideas. And yeah,
it will come. It will come.
I hope so.
I'm hopeful. Angela, when at the very end of these things, there's another little tradition. I've only recently started it, but I'll call it a tradition. I don't know if you know this, but Benjamin Franklin back in the day, in his like his meeting group, his discussion group, he had this list of questions that they used to go over at the end of every meeting. And they're kind of old fashioned, but a lot of them I think are like really cool and interesting. And I like to, before I send you off your merry way, I like to ask my guests just one or two of these questions from Ben Franklin's notebooks. Are you willing to participate in this final segment?
Sure.
The first one is, they're very short and quick. And again, you can decline. Do you know of any young, deserving beginner lately set up whom it lies in the power of this group gathered here today to encourage?
Let me think. I'll give it to Amy Therese.
Nice.
I don't know if she's younger than me or whatever, but
I would guess. I had her on here a couple weeks ago.
She has a very small voice, so it makes you think she's younger than you.
Yeah,
but yeah, she's kind of like new in the sense that she's going fully into the fire, right? You know what I mean? I feel like I'm sort of looking at myself, you know, 2 or 3 years ago. So I would love to see her do more long form stuff and, you know, write more and stuff like that. All
right. Excellent. Shout out to Amy Therese. If anyone out here is listening to this, maybe tweet a link to this video to Amy and use the timestamp so Amy can see the shout out. The next one would be, do you think of anything at present, Angela, in which this group gathered here today may be serviceable to mankind, to their country, to their friends, or to themselves?
Are we talking about, so the slightly antiquated language is putting me off. Are we talking about a institution or a movement or a?
I guess the idea of the question is like, do you have any thoughts for things that I or this show, this little subculture that I have around the live stream and the podcast that I do? Is there anything that you think we could do to improve the world in some way?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what I said before. I just think that like trying to just pry open that space, and that's enough. That's actually a huge thing right now. It's absolutely. I mean, it's so necessary that, like, without it, I mean, I don't know. Without it, it's kind of hopeless, right? Like, as in, if nobody can manage to do that, then things are really hopeless. So it is a very important task, really, to and it's most important on the left, because the right already has their kind of crazy like world where they can say anything and all taboos are broken and so on. But breaking that culture, the really, really shut down a culture that's there on the left is like, it's a huge task, and it's very important, and it will actually decide the future of the left in many ways. I mean, people often say, like, why are these people so vicious and so on? They're actually not stupid. They understand that they're fighting for the future of the left, of what it means. And they're fighting for control over it, and as I say, what it means. So that's what these things are doing too. And the great thing about taboos is that, or the great thing about, I guess, a kind of like something that is being barely held together but is quite corrupt, is that all it needs is like one or two people to break it successfully and survive, and then the whole thing falls apart. Because yeah.
You got me real inspired right now. I've never felt so fully understood, Angela. No, I that's incredibly well put. I completely agree with that kind of empirical model of how things actually work and how culture really advances. I completely agree. So thank you for that. It's really, really nice parting words. And also, next time I get in trouble for something, I can just say Angela Nagle told me to do it. She told me. All right, Angela, this was a bit of a long one, so I hope I didn't keep you too long. Thank you for hanging out with me. It was really, really awesome conversation here.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
All right, Angela, it's great to know you and great to chat with you. And I hope we stay in touch.
Great. Bye.
All right, we'll let you go now. Bye, Angela.
Bye.
All right. That was awesome. She's super cool. And we're still live, right?
Yep.
Cool. So thanks, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're here for the first time. I do conversations like this all the time nowadays. And this will very soon go to the podcast. The podcast is called Other Life. All of my stuff is just called Other Life. And if you search for it wherever you get your podcast, you should be able to find it. So subscribe and you'll see it out in somewhere between a couple days and a couple weeks. It kind of depends on what I'm doing. I'll put the podcast on the Patreon feed like right away, like tomorrow or the next day. So if you really want to listen to this, like when you're going to the gym or whatever, you can become a patron if you want to, but it'll become public soon. So don't worry about it. Any particularly interesting or important comments or discussions that were happening throughout this conversation that I should address?
There's a lot of stuff, honestly.
Was it
unrelated?
Was it very active?
Yeah, there's like a few just like heavy hitter commenters just sort of arguing back and forth with each other about various.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up then. I'm tired. That was awesome. So thanks everyone for hanging out as always. And I'll see you next time.